You've seen the movies, right? The Library of Alexandria, a magnificent monument to human knowledge engulfed in a sea of flames. Countless priceless scrolls, the wisdom of the ancient world, all turning to ash in a single, tragic night. It's a powerful, dramatic image. But what if I told you that's not really what happened? What if the story you know, the one about a single catastrophic fire, is more myth than history? Welcome. Today we're peeling back the layers of legend to uncover the real story of the Library of Alexandria. We were going to step beyond the smoke and spectacle to find a truth that is far more complex and, in my opinion, even more fascinating. The library wasn't just a building that burned down. It was a living, breathing idea. And its story isn't about one sudden end, but a slow, gradual fade. And a legacy that quietly echoes in every library, university, and search engine we use today. So, let's start with the big one, the inferno that never was. The most popular suspect for the destruction of the library is, of course, Julius Caesar. The story goes that in 48 BCE, while besieged in Alexandria, he set fire to enemy ships in the harbor. The flames got out of control, spread to the city, and poof! The world's greatest collection of knowledge went up in smoke. It's a gripping tale. But the historical evidence is shaky at best. Yes, Caesar was in Alexandria. Yes, there was a fire at the docks. Some ancient writers, like Plutarch, do mention that a large number of books were destroyed. But here's the crucial part. Strabo, a geographer who actually lived and worked in Alexandria just a couple of decades after Caesar's visit, describes the Mausion, the research institution that housed the library, as still a functioning, active place. He talks about its scholars, its halls, its dining commons, but he never mentions a giant library-destroying fire. If the world's greatest library had been reduced to a pile of ash just 30 years earlier, don't you think he might have mentioned it? This discrepancy tells us that while some scrolls, perhaps in warehouses near the port, might have burned, the main library itself likely survived. The idea of a single cataclysmic fire is a dramatic oversimplification. The reality is that the Library of Alexandria didn't die in a blaze of glory. It faded. Think of it less like a sudden explosion and more like a candle slowly flickering out, weakened by centuries of political instability, budget cuts, and shifting cultural priorities. After Caesar, Alexandria remained a powerhouse of intellect for a long time. Scholars like Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with mind-blowing accuracy, and Hipparchus, the father of trigonometry, did their groundbreaking work there. The library even continued to collect texts. There's a legend that any ship docking in Alexandria had to surrender its books. They would be copied by the library's scribes, and the copies would be returned to the owners, while the library kept the originals. But the world was changing. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was facing serious crises. In 272 AD, Emperor Aurelian fought a brutal battle right in the streets of Alexandria. His forces devastated the royal quarter of the city, the very district where the main library was located. This was likely a major, devastating blow, far more significant than Caesar's fire. Then came the rise of Christianity. In 391 AD, the Patriarch of Alexandria, a man named Theophilus, led a campaign to destroy pagan temples. A daughter library called the Serapeum, which housed a massive collection of scrolls, was torn down by a mob. Statues were smashed, and its contents were likely scattered or destroyed. This was another brutal wound. But was it the final death blow? Maybe for that specific building, but we know that private collections and smaller schools continued to exist. And what about that other famous story? The one where the Arab conqueror, Caliph Omar, ordered the library burned in 642 AD, supposedly saying the books were either redundant to the Quran or heretical. Well, historians are almost universally in agreement that this story is a complete fabrication. It doesn't appear in any historical text until over 600 years after the event was supposed to have happened. It was likely a piece of later propaganda. So, to truly understand the loss, we have to understand what the library was. It wasn't just a dusty warehouse for scrolls. It was part of the Mouse-yon, a temple of the muses. Think of it as a government-funded, all-inclusive research university and think tank, centuries ahead of its time. Scholars were invited to live there, given a salary, free meals, and the freedom to debate, research, and write about everything from astronomy and medicine to poetry and philosophy. At its peak, it may have held up to 700,000 scrolls, though that number is probably an exaggeration. But even a more conservative estimate makes it the largest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. Its mission was breathtakingly ambitious: to collect all the knowledge of humanity. Agents were sent across the globe to buy or copy every book they could find, in any language. It was here that the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek. It was a melting pot where Greek philosophy met Egyptian mathematics and Babylonian astronomy. So if there was no single great fire, what happened to all that knowledge? Well, the most beautiful part of this story is that much of it wasn't lost. It was transformed. As Alexandria's influence waned, scholars migrated. They took their knowledge and their scrolls with them. They went to other centers of learning, like Constantinople, and later to the great cities of the Islamic Golden Age, like Baghdad. In the 9th century, Baghdad's House of Wisdom became the new Alexandria. Scholars there painstakingly translated a vast library of Greek scientific and philosophical works into Arabic. They preserved the knowledge of Euclid, Ptolemy, and Aristotle through Europe's Dark Ages. Centuries later, these very same Arabic translations would find their way back into Europe, often through Spain and Sicily. They were translated into Latin and helped ignite the intellectual explosion of the Renaissance. Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton all stood on the shoulders of giants who had once walked the halls of the Alexandrian library. In that sense, the library never truly died. Its spirit, its very essence, lived on. It survived in the margins of medieval manuscripts, in the lecture halls of Islamic universities, and in the gears of Gutenberg's printing press. And today, that spirit is alive and well. Every time you access a digital archive, every time a scientist shares data with a colleague across the world, every time we collectively believe that knowledge should be preserved and shared freely, that is the legacy of the Library of Alexandria. The physical building may be gone, but its dream of a universal collection of knowledge is closer to reality now than ever before. We no longer have to fear a single fire. Our library is decentralized, digitized, and democratized. The real tragedy of the Library of Alexandria isn't a story of fire and destruction. It's a cautionary tale about how fragile institutions of learning are. They need funding, they need protection, and most importantly, they need a society that values curiosity and truth. So the next time you hear the story of the Great Fire, remember the real story. Not a sudden fiery end, but a slow, complicated unraveling, and a legacy of knowledge that stubbornly refused to be extinguished. The library lives, not in stone or flame, but in every mind that dares to seek and to know. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more dives into the stories behind the myths. See you next time.